I've got a philosophical question now.
No, go right ahead. Keep going.
As you likely know from this area, from an environmental standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, people, love the Columbia River, they love the gorge. It's held up probably, certainly throughout the country, maybe even throughout the world, as this sort of beautiful place that was carved out of eons ago. What would it take to get the railroad to move their tracks away from the Columbia River?
I can't even imagine, really. I don't even know if you could do it with all the permitting issues that our country finds ourselves. You have to remember these railroads were built 120 to 150 years ago, back in a time where, people thought there's a national need to have a railroad out here and to provide commerce and, quite frankly, passenger.
Right.
And now to pick up a railroad, I'm not trying to beg off your question. I'm not sure it's possible.
Yeah, and honestly, the reason why I'm asking that question is you're obviously you know better than I, but you're absolutely right as to the dynamic of how this thing played out 100 plus years ago. More level land, access to the river, all of these necessities. It made sort of perfect sense for the railroads to go where the railroads have gone.
Yep.
As time moves along, and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but as time moves along, as this sort of dynamic plays out where you say, look at this beautiful area, and one would also say, why the heck do we have that railroad?
That darn railroad, right.
That darn railroad, probably worse sometimes. Why do we have that darn railroad sitting there? Sort of like, hey, if I had a magic wand,
Sure.
Let's get rid of that thing, or let's move them over to the Oregon side. We don't much like Oregon. Let's move over to the Oregon side and leave this side, pristine, but probably not in the cards.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I can't imagine. I hear your point. James J. Hill was the railroad builder back 120 years ago when he laid out this. He was actually Canadian, but when he laid this out, I don't think he ever contemplated there'd be windsurfers on the gorge.
He wasn't thinking.
Yeah, he wasn't thinking big enough. So now these railroads are kind of set.
Yeah.
We've taken up a lot of railroads in the country since 1978, 79. We've actually taken about a third of the railroads out of our nation.
Oh.
And quite frankly, a number of the miles in the state of Washington. Old Milwaukee Road used to run through here.
Uh-huh.
Actually used to be electrified, a little ahead of their time, right? And those were railroads that, quite frankly, went bankrupt through the decades. And but I think it would be a really long putt to think about moving a major railroad now.
I think the other thing to consider too is what the modal transfer would look like. If commerce is still going to move, if you remove the railroads, but commerce still moves through the gorge, then you're putting all that traffic on trucks, and that's all going to be on the highways. So then you have a far more profound impact, right? 280 trucks, that's the equivalent of
Well, I was actually
one
thinking
train.
about rebuilding the tracks near Yakko. Sort of moving it in.
Yep.
But
Dude, quite a ways.